Today is our second event, and it is focused on teaching and education. So you're going to hear about our panelists' journey to where they are now, consider the different careers path within education, and get your questions answered. So we did ask some of you to, well, everyone who registered to submit a question. So we do have some questions that were submitted, but if you didn't get to submit a question, that's absolutely fine. The chat is open, all right? So for today's panel, we have Zulai Martinez. She's an assistant principal of instruction. She's waving right now. We also have Tyree Alexander, who's also waving for us. He's a high school teacher and instructional team leader for the School for Applied Math and Science. We also have Paula McKinnon, who's also waving to you right now. She's a guidance counselor and a college counselor. And last but not least, we have our very own Professor Edward Paulino, who is a global history associate professor. So I am going to actually start off by, I'll call on you each, but if you could just introduce yourself. So I'm going according to the order that I see. I'm going to go ahead and call on Paula first, because she's to my right on the Zoom. So if you could just introduce yourself, let us know a little bit about your education journey.
Okay. It's a little bit roundabout, so I'm glad that you guys are so focused now at a young age. I actually came to New York to go to acting school, believe it or not, and worked in a law firm after that, got married, had a child, and decided I wanted to go back to school to be a teacher, which I did. And I started a program in elementary education, and I didn't love the teaching part of it. That was me. But I related very well to the kids, and they always came and they told me about their problems or issues, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, I want to be a counselor. So I went back to school. I got my master's in counseling psychology, there's like different tracks you can take to be a school counselor. You can go directly into a school counseling track. The master's that I got, I could have been a mental health counselor, a vocational counselor, or a school counselor. And from there, I worked. I should make a caveat. I just retired in February. I worked part-time at Brooklyn Tech High School, which is the school that I recently worked at. But I worked 8 years at LaGuardia High School, and I was Nancy Yang's guidance counselor, which is how I got invited to this event. And my 30-year-old son now works at he works at John Jay, and he and Nancy, and I think I took him into LaGuardia when he was a little boy, and Nancy said, they were in a meeting together and said, wait a second, is your mother Mrs. McKinnon? So one thing I do want you to know, once you get into the world of education, I see that Joshua, Mr. Alexander, was his teacher. It becomes a small world. So I worked at LaGuardia for 8 years. I worked at DeWitt Clinton in the Bronx, and then I finished my career at Brooklyn Tech High School. Each very different places, different cultures that we can talk about later. And I guess the big thing for me was I went into my career that I really loved very late in my life, but I found it. So sometimes, you might start with something. You might think, oh, like I saw someone on the chat said they want to do elementary ed and they're a forensic science person. At Brooklyn Tech High School, they have a class forensic science, as they do at many high schools. So you might want to look into that. So there's a lot of options in the field of education, and welcome to our world. That's all I want to say. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Full circle moment. Love that. Love. Next, I'm going to call on Tyree. If you can also just intro yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Tyree Alexander. I was born and raised here in New York. I attended New York City public schools for the majority of my life until I went to college. I went to college in Atlanta, Georgia. Went to Morehouse College down there. And as a student, I knew that I wanted to work on political campaigns. That was what I wanted to do. I wanted to help facilitate elections. So I have a bachelor's in marketing. But during my time in school, I often volunteered with lots of nonprofit programs and lots of schools. So in addition to all the marketing firms that I applied to, I also applied to TFA. And I got into TFA back in New York City. So I decided to move back to New York, and I told myself I would teach for a little bit. And I ended up teaching US history, government and economics, where I had Joshua as a student, and also computer science. And here I am in the 10th year. So I'm currently in my 10th year of teaching. I've been at the same school the entire time, Urban Assembly School for Applied Math and Science. And I love it. So that's it.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tyree, for sharing. Next, I'm going to call on Zulai. If you could just share with us a little bit about yourself and your journey as well.
Hi. So I also born and raised in New York City. I was not going to go into education. I was going to be a lawyer from the time that I was young. I knew that I was going to be a lawyer. And it wasn't until I actually graduated college, because I was the first in my family. So I didn't actually know if I would ever make it there. So it was kind of like, I knew it was a goal, but I didn't quite know how I was going to get there. I kind of just took it 1 year at a time and kind of just did whatever my advisors and my counselors told me to do till I got to the next step. And then I graduated, and that's when I finally allowed myself to look into law school, and then realized that I would never, ever be able to afford it. It was just way too expensive for me. And then I found myself with an English degree and no idea what to do with an English degree. And if you ever Google what to do with an English degree, often number one will be law school, but number two will be teaching. And I thought to myself, oh, teaching, that would be interesting. And so I applied to, Tyree mentioned TFA. TFA is Teach for America. That's one of the programs that gives you an accelerated way of getting into teaching. I became a New York City teaching fellow, which is like a TFA, but it's specific to New York City. TFA can send you anywhere in the country, which is one of the things that makes TFA wonderful. Anytime. So I became a teaching fellow. I applied. I was accepted. I became an English teacher. I was placed in a school in the Bronx at Truman High School. I was there for 10 years. I taught pretty much everything at Truman. I just found myself really falling. I didn't know that I would do this. It was kind of one of those things like I'll try it for a couple of years. And then I'll see where life takes me. And 17 years later, I've never left teaching. I've never left the Bronx. I fell in love with the kids, and here I am now.
Thank you so much. I feel a theme happening in the room, but I'll say it after Professor Paulina goes. So Professor Paulina, if you could just introduce yourself to us as well and just share a little bit about your education or your journey to education.
Sorry about the difficulties. I'm running into issues, but just same here, born and raised in New York City. Wanted to get out of the hood. Education was my salvation. And
oh, you went back on mute, Professor Paulina.
To
there you go.
Back home, and I just stumbled into, into a PhD with the help of a lot of mentors. So it just, my vocation was teaching, and teaching was my vocation.
Awesome, thank you so much. So, I was saying, there's a theme here, and a lot of educators I find is usually like this wasn't my first goal. I kind of stumbled into this. I didn't really think about it. And honestly, within higher ed too, when we think about education, I feel like that's everyone's story. So I say this to just as encouragement to everyone in the room, because we all kind of envision what it is that we want to do when we grow up. And just know that education is absolutely a great career to hop into, and something I think that I most enjoy for sure. So if not mentioned already, what inspired you to pursue teaching or be a part of the education system? And how do you continue to find that inspiration within the education system? So I'm going to actually start off now with Tyree. Tyree, and then I'll call out the Jordan.
So like I mentioned before, education was not my primary choice of career. I had spent, my entire life, I've been in school since I was 6 weeks old. So I just knew that I didn't want to be anywhere near a school building. But I often found myself volunteering in spaces of education. My mother has always worked in daycares. My aunt was a paraprofessional, so it's just like, conversation was always around school growing up, and I really did want to get far away. But once I found myself in the classroom, what really kept me is that I laugh at work every single day, and no 2 days are the same. And when I talk to my friends about their jobs, of course, we're all stressed, but I always have a funny story to tell, or I always have like this endearing moment to talk about. And my work is not centered around paper and data and computer screens. It's centered around people. So the fact that I get to interact with people, I get to watch them grow, I get to assist them, and they do the same for me. My students have all seen me grow. My students have all assisted me in many different ways. So just that like relationship building, and it continues even after they graduate. So just knowing that like this job or this career just allows you to truly develop relationships at a level that you might have not experienced before in your life, is what has kept me in the classroom this whole time.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Paula, if you could answer as well.
Sure. Well, I think what spurred me on to, because I had been thinking about counseling for a long time, is my experience in high school. I'm actually the only person not from New York City. I came from a small town in Massachusetts, and I'm a lot older than everyone. And in those days, now students like apply to many, many schools. And I wanted to go away to a school in New York, actually, to study theater. And I had a guidance counselor. She said, "Oh, no, you should go to Boston College." It was like an Irish Catholic town. I'm not Irish Catholic, but anyway. So it was like off I went to Boston College, and to be near my home. Except my parents wanted me to be near my home. And I didn't really have much guidance in high school. I was a first generation also. And I felt like it ended up that I've been a college advisor for many, many years. And that's what I do part-time now. And I felt that I needed to, I didn't want to happen to me because I was very unhappy, at least at the beginning of my college career. I didn't want what happened to me to happen to other students. And I felt like I had this, mission that I really wanted to help kids find the right path. And I think like in high school, I suffered with a little bit not being in the so-called in crowd, maybe suffered with a little depression. I was like that kid against the wall, sort of like looking sad. And I also had, because being a guidance counselor, you're concentrating on the academic, the social and emotional aspects of each child. And so I felt like I wanted to also help kids in that respect, because I certainly sort of didn't feel like I was part of that whole high school scene. So I hate to say it, but I really kind of got into this field because I wanted it to be better for kids, that to give them things that I never got in high school. So that's how I got there.
I love that. Don't say that you hate to say it. Say that you love to say that. That was great.
I love to say it. They stunk.
Yeah.
No.
Love it. Love it. So next, Professor Paulina, if you can go in.
Got it. I'm here. Can you see me?
Yes, yes.
I got it. Thank you very much. So the question was, what informs my career and teaching?
what inspired you to teach, or what keeps you inspired within this particular field?
I mean, what inspired me is I've always loved history. I remember in the third grade, Miss Lamazo saying everybody at the board, and I was able to pick out all the cities in the world. And, she's like, you're good in history. And so little things like that drove me to become a historian. My mother says that in the 8th grade, I already knew I wanted to be a professor. But the love of history is one thing. The other is the mentorship, right? The idea that I was once a 20-year-old and I was more lost than I am now and insecure. And that oftentimes it's not just about you. It's the difference between an 80 average and 85 average. The difference really is about an older person, an educator, a mentor saying, you can do it. I went through this. And actually, you don't want to go out down First Avenue because there are pit holes. And if nobody tells you, you're going to fall down. So the idea that I can actually help in real time and shape somewhat the future of students is incredibly invigorating. And it's kind of like, I think we're Jedis, right? I think that's the best way. It's really the high you get that you can positively transform young people in the now for the future.
I love that. That was great. Thank you so much. And then last but not least, Zulai.
So like I told you guys, I graduated from college, didn't know what to do with my English degree. And it was actually the day before the last day of the application for the teaching fellows. And I was going back and forth. Should I submit this application? I don't know that I want to do this, whatever. At that time, I was working as a receptionist at the YMCA, McBurney YMCA on 14th Street. And one of my best friends, Roy, had passed away from cancer when I was 22. And he worked at the YMCA as well. He was the one who had gotten all of his jobs there. All his friends worked at the YMCA. He just little by little kind of all got his jobs. And when he passed away, they put up a plaque to him in his memory. Because he was only 23. We were all so young. And I was going back and forth, and I was the receptionist there to close down the place that day. And I'm turning off all the lights, and I'm walking in, all the hallways and stuff, making sure everything is fine. And I go by his plaque, and I just remembered how much he loved working with kids. I mean, he loved it. In his 20s, he was not a teacher. He had been in the Army before that, had come back and suddenly gotten a job working at after school programs with kids. And I mean, loved it. And much like Tyree, every day very challenging days he had, even with these kids after school, but just every day a funny story, something some kid told him that it's kids will tell you things that it never in your wildest dreams it would occur to you to think of. And so when I saw his picture, I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And then I became a teacher, and I got to teach the things that I loved to read. I mean, that was the great thing. I loved to read. And when you're a teacher, especially here in New York City, where our curriculums are not set in stone, schools can very much decide what a curriculum looks like in New York City. You're pretty open to teach what you want to teach, the topics you want to cover, as long as you're teaching to whatever standards have been established. And so, it was amazing reading Shakespeare with kids who had never even heard of Shakespeare, which I thought was insane, because I'm thinking everybody knows who Shakespeare is, right? And it's and the first time you read it with children, it's it wasn't even about whether they enjoyed it. I enjoyed it so much that they enjoyed it. It was it's amazing the way that you can influence students and children just by being your authentic self, because a lot of you guys are young, so you might still be this way, but I will tell you, no one will tell you your truth the way a young person will tell it to you. And so it's that just kind of it just made it so that every single year I wanted to come back, and I wanted to do it again, and I wanted to try with a new set of kids. And I just found it keeping me young. And then I loved working with teachers. I loved working with my colleagues. My coworkers were amazing. And I found myself saying, you know what, I could reach even more children, and I could make the educational experience of even more children better if I was just helping other teachers be better teachers. And so that's what ultimately made me go, okay, I think I'm ready to leave the classroom. And I was in my 12th year, and I was like, okay, I think I'm ready for this. And and then I became an administrator, and, I get to teach even more children in my own sort of way by doing that, and help teachers become better teachers. And I just find myself inspired every day, even on the hard days. And there are very hard days for very different reasons. But yeah, like once you get into this field, it's the kids that keep you here. It really is. No matter what brings you here, the children will keep you here.
Thank you. And I just want to echo Nancy in the chat that you guys are all just oozing with passion. Like hearing Zulay, you just talk about that and just be so transparent and share your own personal story of even loss and how that helped you find your way. Just really, really great and amazing. I'm gonna turn it to Claudia, who's gonna ask our second question.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for sharing so far. Like Tamara and Nancy said, oozing with passion here. If you see me over here on my camera, I'm like nodding my head constantly. But the next question I have for everyone is and I've heard some of you mention it too, what's your favorite part of the job, but also what are some challenges of teaching? And I'll just hand it over to Paula.
Well, I would say that the best part of my job, of course, as everyone has been saying, is interacting with kids, making a difference, helping them, whether it's with a personal issue or, a family issue, or they're having a tough time in school with a teacher, or at my latest job, as I said before, every school has a different culture. There's a tremendous pressure on these kids. It's a specialized high school to do well, to succeed, to go to like a very fancy college, and they get so pressurized. It's like a pressure cooker in there. So helping them navigate through that. So interacting with the kids is the best part of my job. I would say that the hardest part of my job as a guidance counselor is that, as well, I'm only part-time now, but the tremendous caseloads that we have. And so, it's always hard to make sure that you're taking care of every kid's needs, because we have so many of them. And sometimes you feel, especially with kids with emotional issues, a lot of it is you may be able to speak to them a lot, but a lot of it is making referrals out, so with big caseload, sometimes you feel like you're putting like a Band-Aid on a wound that's just gushing. And so you can get a little bit frustrated in that aspect, that you don't have the time to give like 200% to every single student. And that being said, you put in extra hours. This job isn't even for a guidance counselor. I used to get there like 8:30 in the morning, and many times I didn't leave until 5 o'clock because I didn't want to do my paperwork, because we do have to do a lot of paperwork and notations and this, that. I didn't want to do that in the day. I wanted to talk to kids and I wanted to help kids. So I'm sure every single person on this panel is going to say, this is not like you go in at 8 and you leave at 2 and you're like, bye-bye. No. It's a commitment, but it's a commitment that I wouldn't have wanted to have done anything else. I made an impact. So it's a great career. That's all I'm going to say. But so I would say, what I said, the strengths and the weaknesses, the good times, the hard times. And, I would say one other hard time is sometimes you just, in my profession, can't get through to a kid and be fighting, and you wonder, and then all of a sudden I'll get like a letter, like, or an email, like 8 years later saying, thank you so much for, like, I didn't even realize I did it. I thought that I failed. I didn't. So anyway, that's my story.
Thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to throw it over now to Zulay.
So like I said, the kids will keep you in the job. Unfortunately, the kids are also what might drive you out of the job. It's not easy. Much like Paula said, there are some kids that no matter how much you try, you will not reach. There are also just some challenges that you're not equipped to deal with, and that you still have to try to find a way to deal with. And when you are, when you find yourself spending your day doing things like breaking up fights, because as a teacher, right, teaching is, when you become a teacher, teaching can be very insulary in the actual execution of teaching, right? Because you're in your classroom, and unless you have a co-teacher, you tend to be there by yourself with your children, with your students, and you teach however many periods a day if you're a high school teacher, or maybe you're in your class all day if you're an elementary school teacher with just like however many kids are assigned to you. And so your interaction with your colleagues, they tend to be like in passing, or if you've got meetings set up or preps together, or after school or before school. But the act of teaching itself tends to be a kind of solitary, in the sense that you're kind of just doing it you with children. So sometimes you don't have to necessarily interact with everything going on in a school. When you get out of the classroom, when you find yourself stepping outside of that sort of sphere and world, you can find yourself just becoming aware of things that you didn't even know were happening around you necessarily. And, that includes things like, just yesterday, we must have had like 4 fights in my building. And when you're an administrator, you're literally running to all of them to try to make sure that everyone's okay and everyone's safe and no one's hurt, and parents are called, and, the guidance counselors are talking who they have to talk to, and mediation is happening. And those kinds of things can make a day, you don't get any work done on a day like that. And they can make a day extremely challenging and very difficult. And yet I will be there on Monday.
Thank you so much for sharing, Zulay. Let me throw it over to Tyree.
So it has been, I'm just going to echo many of the same sentiments. The best part is definitely the kids. But selfishly, the other amazing part is that you continue to learn. You can literally just like explore your own personal passions as a teacher alongside students. So I always had like a secret interest in computer science, but I was always too afraid to study it in college. And teaching has offered me a second opportunity to explore that passion alongside kids. So I realized that our students didn't have a computer science class or didn't really have any tech classes. So we started them, and I had no idea what I was doing, but we were learning together. And you realize that that happens in many different ways, whether it's in after school clubs or whether it's in, projects that teachers are designing, that you get to explore passions, and that's what helps keep people feeling passionate and feeling invigorated about the work that they do, in addition to the people that they work with. And definitely the hardest part is the work-life balance. Much like Paula said, like you have all these intentions of getting things done during the day, but because people come first, oftentimes paper gets pushed to the side, and sometimes you find yourself doing paperwork at home. There are lots of like unaccounted hours. In addition to that, there are some corners of teaching that are just never explored or never really talked about. So in my 10 years, we've dealt with suicide, we've dealt with murder, we've dealt with homeless families, we've dealt with just a wide variety of issues. And it feels like an endless stream. Sometimes you feel like when you get over one, like there's just another one waiting for you. And sometimes you feel ill-equipped to handle it. But luckily, schools are communities, and every single time those tragedies happen, you are reminded that, you work alongside passionate people who have similar interests and goals in regards to your students that you do. So as unfortunate as each and every one of those events are, they do remind us of our purpose and why we're here and what we hope to do.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Community coming together for the greater good of everything that everyone's doing. Let me toss it over to Professor Paulina.
Yeah, I want to second everything that everyone said. It resonates a lot. Just to piggyback on the challenges, it's true. We're not just talking about facts. These are human beings. And so we're not just, educators are not just, automatons. We are social workers, we're psychologists, we're therapists, we're coaches, we're mentors, we're everything. So, and we do so much and we're so interdisciplinary. And it's just a shame that in society, we don't get the recognition, and the acknowledgement, right? Like there should be a statue of an educator in every city and town in the world, right? But that's just me, because we give it all. And everybody, people in corporate tell us, why don't you just, leave your job at work? It's like you work at your job. You can't do that. A vocation means it's 24/7. We're in it, nobody here, even though we know the value of money, got into this to make money, right? And it's incredibly frustrating when this is your passion and your students see that, but the superstructure of society says, no, bling, bling is not an education, right? So those are the challenges. On top of that, the challenges are like, and I think, Paula might have mentioned that, but all of you, I think, touched it directly or indirectly. It's like, it's, for me at least, it's the guilt of those that go through the cracks. You can't save all of them. You can't help all of them. It's just, life is like that. And so you're like, man, because that is the idea. We can help everyone. And then the positive is that for me is that moment when I introduce, and I think Soleil talked about, Shakespeare, right? That moment when they see, not Drake, right? Not Cardi B, when they see this old, torn African-American lady, Billie Holiday, singing Strange Fruit for the first time. Not with a rapper sample, but the original. And moments like that, introducing that 18, 19, 20-year-old for the first time, this epiphany that there's something greater out there, something greater than myself. That I live for, right? It's really, I always tell my students, it's Plato's allegory of the cave or the matrix, right? There's something beyond you. We're all connected. And I think I live for that because, at least for me in my school, which is a Hispanic serving, minority serving institution, often, like many of us, is first year students, first, in their families to go to college. And you only know what you've been taught. So my parents were fourth grade, they only went to the fourth grade. They're immigrants from the Dominican Republic, and, they're factory workers. So, I had no idea about SATs, about essays, about, the correct vernacular, rather, all of this kind of cultural, social milieu and accoutrements that comes with class and also with race. I had no idea. And so I think all of us educators, because we have a couple of years ahead of them, we have the benefit to tell them, I got you. At least I can't tell you everything, but I'm going to help you out in these certain things. That's why it is super important. And we don't get paid for it. We might get a certificate, but the element of mentorship and to know that when you do it right, 8 years can pass by, 15 years can pass by, and they'll catch you on a plane as they did with me or on the street, and they'll stop you and they'll say, teacher, professor, with reference. You can't put a price tag on that.
Amazing.
Thank you so much for sharing. Every story I heard so far, it definitely resonates with me because all the educators in my life stick in my head. Like they give me all the outlets to be able to get all that you do for your student. They recognize and trust me. I'm handing it over to Tamar now.
Thank you so much. Yes. I kind of want to stick a little bit with Professor Paulino because you are a professor, and it is a little bit different than teaching maybe at the elementary or middle school level. What would a day in a life of a professor look like, right? A day where you are going to teach classes, because it's a little different. It's not like you're, being forced to sit in a building from maybe 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. You do get a little bit of flexibility. Can you speak a little bit to some of that?
Yeah, and I just also want to say I did teach a year at Harry Van Arsdale High School in Brooklyn for 1 year. So, mad respect to K through 12 educators. And I actually think there should be more collaboration between high school teachers and college students, because we're teaching more or less the same students. So I don't believe in that kind of barrier. But my much like many educators, my life starts out, with the emails and, and also running interference in terms of, you know, it's more flexible when you're in college, you're 19, you don't have to, like some of my students still, they raise their hand, can I go to the bathroom? It's like, no, you don't have to ask me. You just go. So it's that seeing them or helping them understand that they have control of their time and they have to know how to use it. The other thing is responding in a way that I wasn't trained for, which is, how do you respond when a student says, I just got locked out of my apartment, or I have a restraining order on my partner, or I'm homeless, or I'm undocumented and I can't do the homework. It's not like the 1950s. Well, you have to do the homework. You can't do that. So in a way, there has to be, you have to come up with a new, or rely on mentors to help you craft a type of response for the whole student. And so that's throughout the day: grading, emailing, letters of recommendations, and it doesn't stop. Even at night, I put my kids to bed. Afterwards, I get emails all the time. So in many ways, I don't think it's that different holistically than maybe the high schools, but I'll be very curious to know what's happening now with all of you at the present.
So that's a great way to throw it back to even the rest of the educators in the room. When you hear Professor Paulino talk a little bit about what he does, or what the day in the life of a professor sounds like, what would you say is like some of the difference, or in regards to being in K through 12, and anyone can answer?
I would say there are lots of similarities, particularly around him talking about being aware of the whole child, and just like how that permeates beyond your normal work hours. So just, sorry, hold on a second. There is, so my day as a 11th and 12th grade teacher, of course, I teach my normal classes, but there are a variety of meetings. I also, much like Zulai, help develop other teachers in the building. So I will spend my free periods doing observations, giving feedback, planning with other teachers, meeting with families. So you have scheduled breaks throughout the day, but very, very rarely is that actually a break of you just sitting and taking a break. You often capitalize on that time to get other things done. So I think there's a lot more commonality than you might think between the average day of a professor and the average day of a K through 12 teacher.
Thank you. I kind of want to also add to that as well, because I'm an adjunct lecturer. And so your days can literally get crazy. I taught an 8:30 a.m. class this morning, and I teach a 7 p.m. one. So in between, I'm like working full time as well. So also to everyone in the room, just know that that's a possibility for you as well. If you don't want to go the full-time professor route, or maybe the full-time teacher route, but you still want to teach on the side, and especially being at a school of criminal justice, I also did criminal justice. So I teach criminal justice, and I teach juvenile justice, and all these different forms of justice. And so those are definitely possibilities out there for you all. So just wanted to throw that out there. So one of the things that I definitely want to ask is, what can students do right now? Students who are like, you know what, this sounds so good to me. I'm thinking about maybe being a full-time professor, or I want to be a teacher and then work my way up to being, an assistant principal, or I actually want to be a guidance counselor. Is there anything that they can do now? We're big on telling students to go out and volunteer or intern, or just involve themselves in some way so that they can gain some experience. So what are some things that students can do now? And I'll throw it out to anyone, but Paula, can you start us off with that?
Um, I think it's sort of difficult, like, to do volunteer work in a school unless you're under, because you have to get fingerprinted and all that other stuff. So I was thinking immediately when you said that probably the best idea might be to, like, volunteer via a community-based organization. And there's lots of them, like I know, like the Henry Street Settlement on the Lower East Side. I know some of the places in Manhattan. There's one called the Hudson Guild. I live in Chelsea in Manhattan. That's in my neighborhood, that you could actually, I think, do volunteer work there. They have, like, tutoring programs for younger kids. They have college preparation programs. There's a place called The Door. I'm not sure if you can do volunteer work there, but they have all sorts of social programs. One of my students, actually from Brooklyn Tech, she worked in Nancy. She was a student in Nancy's program, and she just came back, and we had a first gen panel at my school. At my school, we do a lot of events, like how to get ready for as a freshman, as a sophomore. We have a junior, a senior night. We have virtual college reps. And now we're doing things like, have a night for first gen students. Like, how do you approach this process? So she was on a panel, but she went to Columbia Law School, and now she got a job at The Door advising undocumented students on, how to get their green card, how to get money for college, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the community-based organizations, and I might be wrong, the others can chime in, but it's pretty hard to do volunteer work in a school just to come in. Later, when you get in a program, you'll do student teaching, and for counseling, you have to do like a 2-year practicum and internship and put in a lot of hours. So I would start with the CBOs. I think that might be a good way to go. A community-based organization. Sorry, I just always say CBO. Sorry.
Thank you. Community-based organizations.
Organizations. Yes.
Anyone else want to just hop in and tag in on that?
Yeah, it seems as if, just from what I read in the chat, that there's not many education majors here. There are a lot of sort of alternative routes to getting into education in terms of being a teacher. So like Tyree mentioned, being TFA, Teach for America. I mentioned being a New York City teaching fellow. In order to join those programs, you basically just have to keep your grades up. You need a bachelor's degree at the very least. I believe for both programs, you need at least a 3.0. Tyree, you need a 3.0 for Teach for America, right? Yeah. You need at least a 3.0 GPA upon graduation. Because again, also, let's be real, right? Reality happens and you don't ace every course. That just doesn't happen to everyone. So you're really just looking at your end goal when we're talking about that 3.0. If you join Teach for America or a program like the Teaching Fellows, which is, again, an accelerated program, normally what you get, well, I'll speak for the Teaching Fellows and Tyree can speak to Teach for America. Teaching Fellows at that time gave you a summer of training. So for one summer, about 6 weeks, you did like intense sort of like, this is how you write a lesson plan. This is how you control and manage a classroom, stuff like that. And then September, you find a job and you are in that classroom. You are teaching, it is sink or swim. You've got a million people coming into your room because you've got like your mentor from the fellowship that you're doing. You've got your mentor from the school and New York City. You've got your principals and assistant principals and all this other stuff. So, you know, you definitely are going to find yourself sometimes even with more support than you think you could handle. But that would be if you are currently not in education, that would be the way in which, that would be an alternative way in which you can get into education if you know that this is something that you want to do. Once you're a teacher, once you have been teaching, if you're interested, if you really do see yourself as a leader, and like in the sense of not a leader the way sort of Tyree is a teacher leader, and really that just tells me as an administrator that he was excellent at his job, and so the people at his school tapped him to then share that with other teachers at his school, and so become a leader amongst the teachers. If you're that, you just be a good teacher and dedicate yourself to your kids. That's kind of the way that administrators will spot you for that role. If you wanted to be an administrator, an assistant principal, a principal, normally most programs after 5 years, you can join an administrative program. That means going back to college. It means getting either a certification. You can just get a certification. You don't have to get a degree, or you can get a degree. In New York City, if you guys choose to be in New York City, I myself am a child of the CUNY system. My bachelor's and both my master's are from CUNY schools. Hunter College has a great administrator. I'm saying that because I went to Hunter College, but Hunter has a great administrative program, and that one you could get a master's degree. But then there are schools like the College of St. Rose, who also has a really good, in New York City, lots of administrators have certification from the College of St. Rose. So it's not a master's degree, but it will also get you the job. And you need to get that certification. But then also the thing is, to teach, you've got to take tests. So there are, depending on the subject that you have, I had to take it's the CST. God, I don't even remember the name of it. Is that it? Yeah, the CST. There are different subjects. Those of you who want to teach at the elementary school level, you have to take what's called the multi-subject, because obviously you're the one teacher teaching math, English, science, literacy, you're teaching all of it. So you have to take the multi-subject. If you want to teach at the high school level or certain levels of middle school, certain classes in middle school, you would take the test specific to your subject. If you're a special education teacher, if your interest is in teaching students who have learning or emotional disabilities, then you also have to take the special education certificate. If you want to be a special education teacher, you can choose to be what's called a generalist, which means you can be in any classroom, teaching any student and supporting any kid, or you can get a subject-specific special education route. So for example, you could be a special education teacher of English, special education teacher of math. And so that again requires its own sort of tests and preparations and stuff like that. If you choose to become a teacher in New York City allows you to become a teacher with what's known as a transitional B certificate, or a transitional initial certificate. You need at least a bachelor's, and they give you X amount of years to get your master's degree, because you have to have a master's degree to teach in New York City and to become tenured eventually. So you can teach for, I believe they give you 3 years from the day you start teaching. Yeah, Tyree's like my backup. He got all the facts. You get 3 years to earn your master's degree. So if you do choose to go the route that Tyree or I went, just know that you will be teaching and in school. You will be a student at the same time. And that is one of those work-life balance things that Tyree was talking about before that you really got to learn how to do. Same thing if you choose to, if you start a family, that's going to be another sort of work-life balance. Because as Paula was saying, even as a guidance counselor, it takes you a while to get through all the paperwork and all the work. And so a lot of times you got to take that home with you. but those are different ways that you can become a teacher. And again, Teach for America, very specific. Some are specific to New York City. With a Teach for America license, you can only work in New York City. I mean, not Teach for America, excuse me. With a New York City teaching fellow, you can only teach in New York City.
If there's one thing that's clear is that like the professional path in teaching is not linear, right? You can go in many, many different ways. But because most of you are in college right now, I would say start on your campus. So taking advantage of opportunities on your campus gives you something to speak about as you're applying to teacher preparation programs and as you're applying to grad schools and when you're applying to be a teacher. So if you don't already hold any leadership roles on campus, design them for yourself or run for them, seek them, because this is the perfect opportunity to basically build the skills that you need to be a first year teacher. So running clubs, basically, marketing, designing tools, just putting together events. There's just a variety of things that you could be practicing right now on your campus that are going to help you be a better candidate for the Teach for America application, the New York City Teaching Fellows application, or if you decide to go the traditional route. No matter which route you take, you all are literally in like the perfect spot right now. You're all in the perfect spot to start that process.
That was thank you, both of you. Zulay, you like went into the certifications, which was so perfect. So I'm gonna throw it to Claudia, who's going to ask Professor Paulina a specific question that kind of covers like the college level requirements.
So we have a question from Emily. They asked, is it possible to become a full-time professor without a PhD?
When you mean a full-time professor, you have to also think about, is it adjunct or tenure track, which is more permanent? For history, for example, you need a PhD to apply for jobs, even if it's an adjunct position. So, I mean, other positions in college, for example, you can be a law professor and you don't need a PhD. Usually it's a JD. But for the humanities particularly, and I would say for the most part, the social sciences, you need a PhD to practice the traditional field of history in the traditional setting. And I say that because everything now, especially before the pandemic, is changing and evolving. So for example, if you want to be a historian, you should usually have a PhD, but you don't have to teach. But if you teach, if you want to say, I want to be a college professor, I need a PhD, you don't really need a master's, for example. And usually, traditionally, you had to get a BA, MA, PhD, but you can go from a BA to a PhD to get your college position. So at least for the humanities, you need a PhD, and that's longer. Now, usually it takes it took me five and a half years, 2 years of coursework, 1 year of oral exams, meaning you take all day exams on several fields. 4th year, you go away to study, to interview people, to go to the archives, collect data. And then the 5th year, you write up your dissertation, right? But that's a traditional brick and mortar school where I went to do my doctorate in Michigan. But now with online, institutions, that program might be shorter. So, right. So you have to see exactly what type of field you are interested in, and then see what the criteria. I can tell you for history, that's for the most part, that's the way it has been.
Thank you. You talked a little bit about being a historian, right? Can you also speak to the opportunities that different professors, I know that you're teaching history, but the different opportunities that professors can have just by obtaining that PhD, for example. A lot of times we'll see different professors commentating, on particular, whether it's documentaries specialized in one particular area because they're an expertise, or maybe going out and speaking. So can you just speak a little bit about the different opportunities for professors beyond even just teaching?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you dedicate yourself to something for many years, you want to be an expert. So you can be an expert and you can be a professor, you can be a high school teacher. In fact, one of my mentors at Brooklyn Tech, I don't know if he's still there, Paula, I don't know if you remember, he was my high school teacher at Seward Park High School. His name was or is Bruce Baskine or Baskine. He was I think he's the head of the history department, was also with another mentor, Jessica Siegel, right? And so I think about all these things because he always used to say, you are what you study. You are what you study. And for me, if you study something long enough, people are going to kind of gravitate. So my books and my study have been about the Caribbean, African diaspora, genocide, Dominican Republic and Haiti, the border. And so I study that and I don't get tired of it because it's, what do they call that? What's the word that a Citizen Kane at the end, he whispers, Rosebud, right? It's, for me, I'm still feeding the curiosity of that boy who wants to know, how did my parents get here, right? And how did we wind up here? So everything is an extension of that. So when things heat up in the Caribbean, the DR or Haiti, then one of the people, they'll usually go to the professors because they're working on that. When they're not teaching, you're getting paid. And if you work for a public institution like I do, then I work for the taxpayers, and the taxpayers, deserve to know what you're doing, which is in the humanities and how can we understand broadly the human condition. So the New York Times, newspapers can call you, can interview people who are doing documentaries. For example, this is a short plug. There's a recent documentary that came out on the issue of citizenship in the Dominican Republic. It's called Stateless. And the director is a friend of mine called Michelle Stevenson. He was at Tribeca, etc. You can Google it. I happen to be a historical consultant on that documentary. So it allows for you to do different things, right? And not just write books. So you write a scholarly monograph, right, which uses a lot of primary sources. But I also just edited a book, and many historians do, with a friend of mine who's also a professor on an organization I co-founded called Border of Lights, about remembering the victims of the 1937 Haitian massacre, which I argue is the largest lynching of Black people in the Americas in the 20th century, right? But, I did a one-man show also about that. So to be a historian means, and this is something that Elizabeth Acevedo, the poet, says, I think I'm learning that, and this goes for any educator, we should not be afraid to embrace different genres to tell stories, right? And, you could be a high school teacher, you could be a college professor, but if you really love what you do and you spend your time like Schomburg, the Afro-Puerto Rican, who during the day he worked in the post office, and at night he collected like one of the largest treasure troves of Afro diasporic books, then sooner or later you're going to be known. The issue is that sometimes, and just to end, that the structure you might be in might not recognize what you're doing as being of value, particularly maybe in a big institution like, the DOE in New York City, unless you have programs or spaces, and unless somebody else from the outside, from Morehouse, right, says, oh my God, we need this program, right? So also about being able to give yourself your own value, what you do, when people sometimes might not be, knocking on the door wanting to find out about your expertise.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We could go into a whole nother event talking about all of this. But I did yes, I know. So we are absolutely wrapping up now. Thank you guys so much. I'm actually going to just call on maybe like two of you, since we're running out of time, to just share like what is like some of what's some advice you would give to first or second year students interested in pursuing education? And actually, I'll just leave it open to any of you who kind of want to hop in as just the final word. What's the best advice that you can give?
I actually have to leave, so I'm going to jump in. I think that I put some stuff in the chat. I think what I talked about maybe, and another thing that I forgot about is a lot of times if you went to school in New York City, if you go back to like your middle school or your high school, sometimes you can like shadow a teacher, just sort of like they'll allow you to. Or you can do tutoring after school, like in your middle school. There's things like that. I put down some CBOs that you might be interested in joining. Actually, one for college applications, they're paid positions. But look into joining professional organizations. I don't know what they are for teachers, but for counselors, it's called ASCA, the American School Counselor Association. You can start looking around those professional organizations. And the other big thing is to network. I'll just tell you a little quick story before I get off, and then I'll say goodbye because I have a telehealth doctor appointment. But I had a girl at my school who was gay, and her parents were very traditional, and it was an ugly. She into Hunter College. Yay, Miss Martinez. And so because of my networking, I knew the director of admissions there, and she also didn't have any money. And I called him up. I said, this girl needs a dorm. We got to get her a dorm. She can't live at home, and she's going to go to Hunter. And sure enough, they found her a dorm. They found her the money. And that was through my networking. And I've done that like all over the place so that I know people at schools everywhere that I can pick up the phone and I can ask questions to help my students. So, use everyone, network with people, I put my email down. I don't know if anyone else is willing to, but you can definitely me. I have to run. Thank you so much for having me here. And I hope it's helpful to you all from my point of view being guidance. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else want to just hop in real quick and just share just some last minute advice? And we'll make sure that you all get the emails that are shared in the chat for sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I know when it comes to teaching, especially at the lower levels, a lot of people think to themselves, summer's off. I get to have a summer off. And that tends to be a big sort of draw into the teaching field. Yes, you get your summers off if you take summers off, because I'll tell you, in my first probably 8 years of teaching, I never had a summer off because I did summer school. Because not every teacher was willing to do it. And so I found myself teaching summers. So just sort of remember that as yes, you will get a summer off, but believe me, you will earn that summer by the time that summer is done. When I was a student, I almost felt like teachers didn't exist. It's almost like when I left the school and the lights went off, the teachers disappeared and there was no existence. And then when I came back, they were there again. And that's when life happened for them. So now that you're like behind the curtain, just know that it is a very demanding field. Paula hinted at it. You will have a lot of paperwork. You have to prepare. Doesn't matter what level you're at. You have to prepare that day's lecture or class or activity or whatever you're doing. And all of that happens on your time and not the time when you're supposedly getting paid. So, but also, again, it's going to be worth it. I cried every day my first year teaching. I cried every day. 17 years later, it is the best decision I have ever made. So stick through it. It is going to be hard. If this is something you genuinely want to do, it is going to be hard. But believe me, it is going to feel worth it. You will never feel like you wasted your life or wasted your time when you're a teacher. You will never feel that.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else want to add in some last minute words?
Yeah, I'm just going to reiterate what I said earlier. Just capitalize on the fact that you are currently a college student and use this as a time to practice. So use it as a time to practice your time management skills, because that will come into play with everything that Zulai is saying right now, right? Use this time to practice networking, because that will allow you to offer the same services that Paula spoke about earlier. So just like use this time to practice for this profession or any other profession that you might find yourself in. Do not just simply go to class and go home.
Thank you. And then Professor Paulina, do you have any words you want to add in as well?
Ditto, ditto, ditto.
We love it. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I saw them, the students just dropping in thank yous in the chat, but we just applaud all of our educators, especially those who are in the room right now. We appreciate you for spending your afternoon with us. Everyone so appreciates it. I will absolutely share your emails with the students who are in the room. And students, don't forget to connect with people, to network with people, stay in touch. If you have a question, if you're looking for guidance, I'm sure they wouldn't mind just receiving a gentle, nice email, just asking for some words of advice. So thank you everyone again for coming out to our event today. I'm wishing you all a wonderful weekend and a happy Veterans Day. So have a great rest of your weekend. Thank you, everyone.